So yeah, we're going to jump right into this. It's 45 minutes to an hour is not enough time for me to fully, not just unpack, but unfold 500 plus years. So I'm going to just jump right in. And some things that I'm going to cover, some things I will go sort of extensively into, others I won't. That's for you to do that kind of research. I'm just going to introduce it, see what you do with it. All right, let's see if this thing is working. Are we ready?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Let's go. I get a little silly up here sometimes, so just go with it. All right, so why Respecognize? Yes, in some interesting ways I'm going to cover how we negotiate ethnic notions, cultural identity, and unconscious bias. One of the things I want to start off saying is that I want you to consider, as I'm presenting this information, consider your lived experience, right? Always bring in what your cultural narrative is, right? Don't just take in this information, juxtapose it with your own information that personally affects you, and then you kind of play that out in your own body and mind. So why Respecognize? Simple, I'm sure many of you have got this already. It's basically to rethink what you're seeing, right? That sense of spectacle of what I see, let me rethink it. It's just to play on the words of respect and to cognize or recognize. One of my mentors, Baba Chuck Davis, used to always say, if you want to understand the dance, study the people. To understand the people, you need to study the culture, right? So that's sort of what this is. I'm basically going to go through or try to go through these 4 things: migration of gestures, symbolic power, symbolic violence, cultural appropriation, globalization. If you're not familiar with that word, it's just looking at the global and the local. Don't feel offended. I don't know everybody in here, so I don't know what you know. So I'm just sharing. All right, so let's go. Migrations of gestures. I want us to look at something because I want to consider, and let me clarify this, I'm speaking as an African-American person with an American experience. Some years ago, I was in Stockholm, and I was giving a talk on my documentary, and someone in the audience said, "Yes, but we, y'all gonna have a laugh probably, but we don't have racism like that here." And I didn't even get into that, but I did say this: this ain't about you. This is about America and what we're dealing with. So just take it in. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes by Cheryl Willis, and she says, "The deep-rooted structures within a culture are found in the retentions of characteristics of behavior that are not bound by time and geography. That surface structure is bound by time and geography." So then the question becomes, what are the deep-rooted structures? What are the characteristics of behavior? What is surface structure? Usually surface structure and deep-rooted structure are used to speak toward linguistics. We can still think about them in a movement practice. Linguistics is a really good base to kind of uncover some dance ideologies and roots, because we kind of know where people came from and what they were speaking, which gives us an idea of who they were and what movement practice they participated in. So what are some deep structures? These are just a few. What do we have here? Belief, family structures, ideologies, worldview, feelings. We'll get into emotions in a little bit. Language, rituals, specific knowledge, history, the intangibles. It's the intangibles that really come about in the conversation that we really want to understand. It's sort of immaterial material that exists, especially when things go global and we have almost arbitrary sense of what the defining thing is based on this product. But we're not in that experience of the people in that space and how that informs them. We all right so far? Okay. How much, like when I get down, I'll be like going really fast because I'm running out of time. All right, some characteristics of behavior. Let's go through these. So this is separate, right? And we have a sort of Africanist aesthetic on my right and a Eurocentric aesthetic. You may or may not agree with these, but I talk often. Africanist aesthetic, we're talking about the orientation of earth. There's polyrhythm, polycentricism, the sense of pantomime, competition, something in your hand, improvisation, circular line formation, importance to community, percussiveness, innovative, stylish, original, individual, spiritual, asymmetrical. A good friend of mine, Jackie Malone, has a book called Stepping on the Blues, where she talks about that individuality and originality are not just appreciated, they're expected, right? So you think of the different social cultural backgrounds and what the national identity is. Here, log 'em. So how does that play off of this information, right? For Eurocentric aesthetic, we talk about political and elitist bias, verticality, heavenward orientation, couple dances. Some of these can overlap. They should be on both sides. Geometric patterning, country dances, individual dance, percussiveness, still competition, circle line formation. Those things still exist in there. So again, those characteristics of behavior. Surface structures are fashion. The dance itself, not the structural alignment of the dance. Folk songs, foods fit into that. Excuse me. Art, visual, performing, products. The cipher. So we get in to make this hip hop connection. And this is part of that deep structure I'm talking about. We see this. I don't know how engaged we are in the conversation of what a cipher actually is. And if you can see this, I'll use this to help. Usually I draw these on the board, but why waste that time? So this is a basic cosmogram. There's different languages for it, depending on where you are. But it's a spiritual practice. So in this sense of deep structure, I want you to keep in mind, what is your spiritual practice? What is your faith-based practice, Catholicism, whatever. And see how that plays in the dance. So you see the movement. This is what informs the dance. So here, basically, without going into great detail, we are talking about a vertical line that connects the spirit world with the human world, a horizontal line that separates the spirit world from the human world. It is believed that the spiritual world enters our human existence through water, this circle here. This is just the perception of the orientation of the earth. They believed it went counterclockwise. It does not. Well, not the earth, the sun, right? So these smaller are representations of the sun. It's just an idea because the sun doesn't move. So if you ever thought you saw a sunrise or a sunset, you did not. We think we did. We got language, but that's not the truth because the sun doesn't move unless you believe it does. So if you think about a baby being born through the amniotic fluid, the sense of the spiritual world coming into our existence, and certain people who worship, especially in Yoruba traditions, who worship through a bowl of water to connect to their ancestors. So we get that. Water being a space of life. All right, I love this. This is Deidre Sklar. Her 5 premises for a culturally sensitive approach to understanding dance. Go beyond the dance. Go beyond the dance. Get deep into cultural identity, even national identity. So movement knowledge is a kind of cultural knowledge. What do we mean? We mean that movement is a way of knowing who a person is just by that. The internet kind of shifted that. Back in the day, I would know that you were a b-boy, a breaker, because you were from the East Coast. I knew you were a popper or a locker because you was from the West Coast, right? So the way that you dance lets me know who you are as much as you telling me or any other information that fits into that. Movement knowledge is conceptual, emotional, and kinesthetic because there's a sense of where do I belong? BE means to exist long as a certain of a yearning. How do I behave? You're talking about ownership. B, again, means to exist, to have something, to hold, how you hold space for a certain understanding. Where do I come from? What do I value? This idea of hip-hop being this, and we'll get to this globalized idea, works in a particular narrative because our value systems are not the same. The value systems with people in Japan, with people here in Sweden, is not the same as my background. So we do not value this in the same way. We don't come from the same heritage and have been exposed to certain things in the same way. So there is a difference. That doesn't mean that we all can't participate in it. It just means there's a difference in the value. Deidre Sklar also talks about look beyond the movement to get at its meaning. Movement is always immediate corporeal experience. What you know about it is much more different than reading it or watching videos. If I go back, we think about the culture that is shared, learned, symbolic. This recently popped up and caused a frenzy in America. I don't know about here, but America went nuts over this clip of this young girl in Russia. She didn't just go blackface, she went whole costume. She was committed. She was serious. And she has since went on social media and was like, I'm sorry, I didn't know, because she got flooded with all kind of madness. But she didn't know. She literally didn't know. And one guy went to her defense, is like, I don't know why y'all, it's 2019. There is no racism no more. Somebody wrote this on response. and she's just an artist. Well, then she's an uninformed artist of why this would be an issue in America. That issue changes. I know Belgium is dealing with the whole Zwarte Piet thing and how they approach it, and it's in other aspects of Europe. But particularly why people in America were so upset, she was very unaware. We are familiar with the Berber people. We're also familiar with the Moors. I should not have to tell anybody about these people. Really? Come on now. All right, no, thank you. It's the inside joke. Time, y'all. So we know about this people, right? So we get these images of subservient roles, right? So now's the time I'm gonna start going really fast. Why was that an issue? This whole blackface, why is it an issue? And if you're not aware, let's go through. So we have these ideas that have been journaled to look at African people in a particular way, African American people in a particular way. I hope y'all are familiar with all this information already, so we'll just breeze through. Herodotus. Africans eat locusts and snakes, share wives, and speak no human language, but rather screech like bats. I don't know what part of Africa he was in. The only thing that I can think of as a screech is like in dance practice, you hear somebody, that's the only thing I'm like, okay, that you might have heard that, I don't know. Because even if you were in South Africa and they're doing the clicks, I'm like, that's not the same as a screech, but okay, whatever. So that gets journaled. The Europeans that are reading, get that. Gayas. Africans have the clothing hook, muzzles, snouts, turned up. Y'all can read, I don't know why I'm repeating this stuff. Another gay list. Long snouts, possessed, noses, no mouth. I don't even understand where this person was at. All right. Jean Berbeau. Now, his manuscript, which came out in 1732, was used to sort of stoke the fires of why enslavement was a good thing. This is what he had to say. And then we have Reverend John Newton. People love this guy, especially American black folks. I can't stand him or them singing his goofy song, but that's personal. This is what he had to say. Slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls and thus are destined, or not destined, for the next world. The prey was divided upon the spot. Resistance or refusal is utterly in vain. I sinned with an high hand. He is talking about his journeys on the slave ships, talking about people as prey. He sinned with a high hand because they would divide the women amongst whomever. And y'all know the rest. That's the same man who wrote Amazing Grace, by the way, because when his older years, he regretted what he had did, and he wrote Amazing Grace, and black people sing it like it's a black national anthem. And I'm like, if I was the survivor of the Holocaust, I would not be singing a song written by one of Hitler's henchmen. It just don't work. But they do, because they're uninformed. And here's our fourth president, a so-called founding father, the founder of human rights? Yeah, okay, all right. So let's think about symbolic violence as it plays out to the idea of why the blackface character would be an issue, how we still see that in practice in today. We consider symbolic power and how these ideas play out as well. And this is something probably sensitive to you. How much so? I don't know. But you'll get the reference, and I'm not going to stay on it long. This was an issue. It was a huge issue here. Probably still is an issue. I've had opportunity, not in person, but to hear the young man speak about his ideas. But still, even given that this became the talk of the town, that idea of what's being ignored over the issue. And so when I talk about dance, it's the same thing. I don't care what dance form, I don't care what country the dance form is from, you still have to look into the lived practice of the people of what that dance and why it's valuable and what's going on and what we overlook because of bias, because of not being in that environment and what these things mean. So for that blackface in America, these characters, we have these characters. The Sambo character is supposed to be the happy darky because those that were enslaved were supposed to be happy to be enslaved, but they were not. We have the Zip Coon, this idea that you're dressing like them, you're walking like them, you're talking like them, but you're not them. So this imitation is a sense for assimilating. The Mammy character, who we still see played out in certain roles in comedy shows, like if you're familiar with Tyler Perry, his characters and other characters. See, even with Eddie Murphy and the Nutty Professor, you still see that kind of Big Mama type character. The Uncle Tom, should be all familiar with these things, his subservient role. The Jezebel, which we probably now relate to the idea of the video vixen in rap videos. The sense of piccaninny, where you would have the children depicted as subhuman. Why would they do this? If you're not familiar with this is very true, because they would use children as gator bait in the early 20th century. And especially in the South, particularly in Florida, where they would chum the waters. They would snatch babies, put them in cages, and chum the water with them. Most of the times the babies died. Sometimes they got the gator before it got the baby. You would even have figurines. And this is, as you see, it's a pencil. And there's a figurine that was made. And you can still find these. That's a postcard, because they would actually sell these throughout the South. So that when this hit America, Gucci and Montclair on the end, their whole thing was like, notice the penguin. That's not a penguin. And even if you said Zwarte-Piet, we still have a problem, because Zwarte-Piet is steeped in this racial tension. But that became an issue. And it's like, okay, how do you not know this? Because this is a clothing line, so you have to have advertisement, and people already know how they're going to market. So your whole marketing team knew that this was going to be a frenzy, but you decided to do that on February, which in America is Black History Month, so it was like, okay, there's some plans here. Possibly, I wasn't there, I don't know, but that's an issue. Mickey Mouse, Mickey's Melodrama, 1933, Mickey's in blackface. Cartoons were basically steeped in the idea of this sense of coonery, if you will, because of the depiction of African Americans that led to going from newspaper clippings to actual cartoons, and a lot of the cartoons that were made were early blackface minstrels. I definitely don't have enough time for this, so I'm not even going to show this. But there's a scene in here where this is, if you've ever seen The Jungle Book, one of my favorite cartoons. That's King Louis Armstrong. He plays the trumpet in this scene. What is the dance they're doing? They're doing the Lindy Hop. There's a scene of the Charleston. There's also his servant is more of the Zip Coon, because he taunts him because he's out of key, he's out of tune. He's trying to be hip, but he's actually not hip, right? So these stereotypes kind of play in, and we see it all throughout this whole thing. Even the language, the fact that in America they would say that black people were ancestors of apes, and even the song, I want to be like you, I want to look like you, walk like you, talk like you. Right? So this idea of assimilation, which we still deal with in America, especially in dance practice, when the Eurocentric identity is at the catalyst of what dance practice is supposed to be, not recognizing that there is no hierarchy in dance, there's only social and cultural differences in the dance practice. So we don't have time for this. But there's this idea that, African American people were not astute enough to create great art. So the fight against that, and I don't know why you froze on me, bang. Okay, here's a Picasso painting that was influenced by an African mask. We don't talk about African sculptures, we just talk about Picasso. Paul Klee influenced another African mask, which you usually see in Ghana. You also have Modigliani, same thing. So this idea of what was journaled about them, for whatever reason, Herodotus, all of them, whatever reason they wrote what they wrote, they knew it not to be true. And we can all be influenced by different things. So with running out of time, let's try to get in a little bit of this. And whatever we don't cover, we're going to cover in the talk. All right, so let's look a little bit at this here. All right, what is culture? There's so many definitions of what is culture. As I said earlier, we shared ideas. Why would this be a problem? Because, it is not looking at the diversity of our social existence and what it means. There are communities, if you're aware or unaware, there are communities or states, cities in America right now that are still changing the law books that forbid women from getting certain jobs for wearing their hair braided. But Kim Kardashian is celebrated because she's braiding her hair. Right? So the fact that when people talk about cultural appropriation versus cultural exchange, there's no sharing here, right? There's no sharing. Going to somebody's birthday party and sharing in their cultural identity, if it's henna and you're painting hand, that's an exchange, right? Because there's no idea of sharing. But the idea of that there is a sense of privilege, like anybody can wear this hairstyle, anybody can, but it means something in a community where you get to flaunt it around where they're being chastised and overlooked, erased for having what is naturally theirs, and living in a system that perpetually pushed that identity on them is hard to get out of. And so what Trisha Rose in her 1996 book, Black Noise, which mostly looks at rap, I think is the perfect quote. For many cultural critics, once a black cultural practice takes a prominent place inside a commodity system, it is no longer considered a black practice. It is instead a popular practice whose black cultural priorities and distinctively black approaches are either taken for granted as a point of origin, an isolated technique, or just rendered invisible. If I get close to the end, we'll kind of tie back into that. So some things about cultural heritage, it requires memory, and that's part of that cellular memory, right? I don't have time to go into this, but everybody in here, you speak the way that you speak because you were brought up in a community that this noise was being heard, right? There's a certain sense of understanding. So 22 to 24 weeks, the auditory system in the fetus, fully functional. Taking in pitch, taking in tone, even through the amniotic fluid, it's muffled, but it's taking in information, right? Codes are developing in the mind. The auditory cortex is developing once the baby is born. The occipital lobe connects with the auditory cortex, and then it makes sense of the noise by looking at the thing that is making the noise or being called that thing. This is stuff that we grow up in, and it is also because of the DNA and what lives in the DNA. If the mother is having a dream, baby's probably going to have some remnants of that dream. But there's a sense of connectivity that happens with the lived experience that, again, if I go back to the dance that's being done, there's a sense of, there's some information that I can relate to somebody doing this and the way that they move and the way they feel that relates to how I was brought up, that I get it, to somebody else just doing the move. And I can see like there's nothing informing that. You're doing the move, and you're doing the move well, but there's no information, there's no context behind that movement. So again, it's things to think about. Intellectual property, we talk about, well, who owns it? Well, it is owned. Everybody owns this. No, everybody does not. Everybody's participating, don't own. There's no sense of it in your lineage, right? My grandmama did hip hop stuff. They didn't call it hip hop. My grandparents' did it. They didn't call it hip hop. Hip hop is just a name we put on it in the 90s, but it is no different, and I'm gonna get into this in a second, so I'll probably skip past it, but there's no difference than understanding the African retentions. We go back to Cheryl Willis and the deep-rooted structures. There's no difference in the African tensions that were upheld and transmitted to America, having influence from other cultural dynamics, right? Those that were involved in European slave trade, the Taino Indians throughout the southern Great Antilles. There's still an exchange of information or influence, but there's still a deep-rooted structure that if you look at somebody, you guys know who Bojangles is? Bill Robinson? Well, Bill Robinson was taught tap by his best friend, Sammy Eggleston, who's Irish. And he taught him up here. So when Bill danced, he danced up here. But the Africanist aesthetic in terms of his percussiveness, right? His gestures, everything else was of an Africanist aesthetic, but his structure in his dance was Irish versus, say, like the Nicholas brothers, who are more grounded in orientation to the earth. This rarely leaves. Bill Robinson would be an exception to that rule. But you'll see the dances aren't here because of what being connected in your root chakra to the ground represents. So again, what is the information that is held in the body? This just goes back to that very important thing that even the influence of African Americans, while still being dismissed, right? We love the cultural product, not the people so much, but that the first motion picture to have voice is in blackface, like historically. This is the first film to have sound. And y'all decided to do it with, so how important is that? What is the significance behind that? All right, so this is a documentary called Bleaching Black Culture. 93% of white Americans agree that black culture influences mainstream. By the way, this is a great point. This is a great moment for me to say this. I do not believe in the terms black or white to identify people. They're idiotic to me. I will say that, and I hate phrases that separate human beings into these categories. I do not like the phrase people of color. I also think it's stupid, to speak very blunt. Because if you call an Asian person yellow, that's derogatory. If you call an indigenous person of America red man, that's derogatory. Black and white should be derogatory. The problem is those structures have been in place for so long we can't get beyond them. And it causes a problem into our human existence. Everybody in this room, let me be the bearer of good or bad news. Y'all all the same color. Everybody in this room on this planet is the exact same color, but you are different shades of that color. And there's only one. That's why if anybody in here who identifies as white, put your hand on this board, it don't look like this, do it? No. As the same goes for black folks who identify as black. Now, blackness and whiteness, real, right? We talking about constructs. Race, not real. Racism is real because of construct. But we got to get past that because we're humans. All that other stuff is for the birds because y'all, we want to separate the 1% from everybody else, these poor people, but we're going to give you better access. No, we can fight all that. So, moving on. Negro spirituals to hip hop, briefly. It's all the same thing, as I mentioned, alluded to. If you talk about the ring shout, this sense of spirituality that exists. So we go from Negro spirituals to the blues. We got Negro spirituals because people were enslaved. And they're being convinced that you pray and everything will be all right in the afterlife. But then we're free, but nothing changed. Now I got the blues. So we got that coming out, and it just keeps going. But this whole structure is still in place. One of the first songs to have the words hip hop in it, but not in the sense of hip hop that we understand, was Sweet Lips by Scatman Crothers in 1957, where he says, "I want to hip hop, flip, fly." He just rhyming stuff. But even if you look at the etymology, hip is suggested by John Leland. There's people that kind of dismiss this. John Leland wrote a really lovely book called Hip, the History. But there are people like David Shedlower, who was the editor for Oxford, who disagrees with it. But what they agree with is the meaning. They disagree on it written because Wolof, Bantu-speaking people, is a phonetic language. We don't know how it looks. And John Leland says this is how it's written. We don't know that. So they disagree on that. But the meaning, they both agree that it means to be aware of, to open one's eyes. So I spoke to some people who were Wolof, and they were like, we don't know. You would have to ask our grandparents, and they ain't here. But that sense of being hip, for when hip got popular in America in the late 1800s, even in the jazz era, it was spelled with an E, even back to the 60s when it was spelled with an I, 70s it was spelled with an I, is being aware of something. Hop in America since the 50s has always meant to dance, right? My parents went to sock hops, which meant you went to the gym, to the school, you took your shoes off, threw them in the corner, you danced in your socks. So are you putting those two things together? Y'all can figure that out for yourselves. You still with me? Yeah. All right, we okay? Yeah. All right, see how we go through sensitive material really quick and make it light? All right. We don't need that. This is also from that same documentary, but we don't need to get into that. How much time we got? See, yep, perfect. We're gonna close it down. This I'm gonna save mostly for the talk, right? What this idea is, right? What is global, what is local? Because one of the things I think we were talking about earlier is like the space of what hip hop is once it leaves America or once it leaves the environment where it was born. And there's a sense of the thing that connects all human beings is emotions, right? You go through the gambit of what emotions are, how we identify emotions. We all know what it means to be melancholy, to be angry, to be. We get that, to lose someone, to gain someone, we get that. So there's a space in the concept of what hip hop is that allows people, not just the people that the movement comes from, to liberate themselves out of conditions, but it liberates other people out of conditions. So again, whether you talk about logum and the national identity is this and you're not supposed to, hip hop pushes against that. If you're talking about being in Japan where society is very stringent and you're supposed to, what is a Japanese proverb is, the nail that sticks up gets hammered because everybody's supposed to conform. Hip hop pushes against that. So in the way of being that is retained in African identity that has issues because of colonization and certain influence, but still retains that immaterial material that exists in African American communities, that sense of play of being of what we did in the aesthetics, individuality, originality, that still exists. So we're pushing what that narrative is, how you find oneself. So in that space, in the local sense, people should find that. In my opinion, hip hop is not about a dictation where you are supposed to, whatever country you're in, you are supposed to do what Americans do. No. Rhyme about what is an issue in your country. Dress how you dress. Which dress is no, if I had on, if this one pant leg was rolled up and I had on a Kango and a Adidas. That ain't hip hop. That has nothing to do with hip hop. That has to do with an environment and a time period where hip hop adopted, if you can even say adopted, because Adidas, the man who owns Adidas, hip hop wasn't a thing. But hip hop says, well, this is the fashion we like, and we're going to wear this. And then it becomes a representation. So if you think about Stuart Hall and what representation is in terms of stories, memories, how things are constructed, right? We can look at all kind of, even logum is an idea that's been constructed that y'all believe. A lot of Americans believe in their national identity, which the national identity of America is America thinks it's the best, and it's not. But people buy into these concepts, right? So pushing against all that, what should happen in the case of this localization is that this thing from this particular group of people that went global should now be used conceptually as a way for this community to speak to their lived experience through this idea of movement. It doesn't have to be this dance unless you want it to be that dance. If you want to do what we were doing in the 80s, fine. But to see B-boys pantomime through up-rocking what gangs did as a lived experience, I'm like, that's not even real. You're not convincing me because that's not your life. You're playing the character. And so it becomes acting not informed by a lived experience, which still looks good. And it speaks to that. But it's not authentic, and you don't need to do that. That's what they did at that time period because that was the thing to do. That is what was being imitated in real life, in real time. Now it's just a characterization that they take a little bit too far. And it loses, for me, it loses value in that way. It becomes a performance where most African Americans learn to dance in the community. You don't go to dance school because no one needs to teach you how to do what you do culturally. You just do it. No African child is learning how to undulate their body. They just grow up doing it, right? They play cans and learn how to play the drum, the djembe, right? You just learn how to do this stuff. It's the corporeal language. We understand it. You don't have to teach me how to wave. You just walk up and do this. But you can't walk up to everybody in the world and say, do this when they don't move their bodies. They have the potential to move their bodies. We have the capacity to learn any language, to learn any song from anywhere in the world. But we didn't grow up with that. So it doesn't speak to us in the same way, and we don't learn it in the same way. We have to break things down. But I digress. So we just want to use this concept to speak individual truths. A couple things on here. We don't need to cover that. Yeah, I think I'm rounding out now. Leave y'all with a couple things. Love this quote by Halaf Olsamard. The hip-hop aesthetic has now been globalized and not detract from its Africanist origins. It only further humanizes and universalizes African cultural foundation, which is very interesting because when I see hip-hop done the way it is practiced globally, I see a bunch of people who don't understand the nuances of the movement and the information behind it, but expressing themselves in what would be considered black identity, right? But it's not it. So I'm like, you want me to come to, let's just say, you want me to come to Sweden and judge a battle? And that doesn't work for me. One, I don't like battles. But two, I don't like judging anyone's individuality. That's how they did. Who am I to judge their individuality, right? There's a sense of cyclical subjectivity, objectivity. Music is subjective. You write it, it becomes objective. The dancer hear it, moves to it, it becomes subjective again. But now it becomes objective because now it's inscribed in my body. And then that inscribes on someone else's body, which then makes it objective, subjective, again. So it's just continuously going. But moving through the aesthetics that absolutely make no sense. I'm doing this because I'm supposed to do this. This is how you dance to this music. But there's no meaning behind it. So you have to find that. You have to find what are the gestures that exist in your community, how you add them in to this thing. Just because I do the nay-nay, I don't have to do this. I have to do this. This is kind of neutral. It's a root. But I could do whatever. I could do whatever speaks to my community. People learn to dance. I don't know what to do with my hands. So what do you do with your hands normally? Are you a community that talks with your hands? Like, how do you brush your hair? How do you wave high? Why these simple gestures? If your best friend, each of you, your best friend, you ain't seen him in 30 years, walk through that door. What's your reaction? Go. Right? So I got a lot of this. I got some of this. You in the party, and we socially, You're right, that could be a screech. So you got that. As a gesture, we in the party, my best friend, I ain't see, yo, like, and so when people dancing without seeing the best friend, that's what you're doing. It's acknowledgement. It's celebrating not the person that came through the door, but celebrating what I'm hearing. And a response and a connection, especially if it's an older song, a connection to my lived experience. But this it's in that, right? And everything is connected to, I don't have time to go into music and triplets. I do not have time to go into triplets. From African retention all the way down. Like, we constantly see this information, and even just to, I'll give you two quick examples. Movement-wise, shut up. Movement-wise, I know her. Movement-wise, when you think about the genealogy, right? So how many Lindy Hoppers in here? I don't really say swing because that irritates my skin. Swing dancing. You're doing a Lindy Hop. Just call it what it is. The movement swings, the dance is Lindy. Stop trying to change the name. Right? That's erasing. No erasure. Lindy Hop. So, that's just me, though. Y'all live in your practice. So, if you do something like the Adowa, right? This is dance in Ghana. I don't have time to do the whole Adowa. I'm not going to do that. But there are two steps in this that you commonly see, right? And it's a little bit changed. So if I'm doing the Adowa, one of the steps, I'm not going to go too far, one of the steps would be this, and I'm really condensing my body up because I don't want to travel, right? Would be that. Another one would be this, right? And there's all kind of other movements that go with it. But the two I'm looking at are this one and this one. So you jump into, let's jump, late 1800s, 1890s. That step is now known as the Camel Walk, which looks like this, right? So we don't have that one, but we now have a flat-footed hip thrust, boom. 1924, Ma Rainey, CC Rider comes out. We have a slower version, doesn't quite start to hook, but rolls a little bit more, right? Rolls from your heel through the arch, ball, toe, boom, and we're progressing. We jump to 30s, 40s, we get this version that's more popular. Didn't start then, but more popular, and whether you're doing it this way, whatever you're adding to it, right? So then we see that. You also start to see the hook. By 1957, Chuck Willis remakes Ma Rainey's song, CC Rider, and the young teenagers call it the Camel Walk Stroll, which now looks like this. And you do this linearly, all the ladies, all the men, meet in the middle, go down. In the 70s, that becomes known as the Soul Train line. All from the Adowa. You have the same thing with Guinea, with a dance called the Yankee, which becomes the Charleston. I won't go through the decades, but you get the idea. I just did that in Boston, and a bunch of people from Guinea ran up to me and was like, "You say Yankee?" They were shocked. I was like, yeah, I do a lot of research. So, closing out, there's a few things. See how that worked out? Just a few things. Just a few things to consider. Just because hip-hop is, even though I hate the term, just because hip-hop is a black idiom that prioritizes black culture and that articulates the lived experiences of blackness, real thing, does not deny the pleasure and participation of others. It does not. Heritage plays a I can't talk right now, I'm a little out of breath. Symbolic role in the creation and recreation of a range of cultural and social identities. I have a really interesting breakdown for identity, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just throwing it out there. It might come up in the talk. So race and racial differences, I really struggle with that language. Differences are products of our social interaction interpretations that occur in all walks of life. And they are not invisible just because we experience a hip-hop event. And culture reflects belief. BE means to exist. LIEF means happiness. So yeah, I'll close with that. There's a lot of stuff in between there, but again, that's for you to do the research. Just being from knowing. You feel me, cuz? I ain't even going to go into that. I'm just closing with that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Because it's an honor to have you here, but also thinking about all the themes that you brought up about transgenerational memory and how it's transmitted, and energy and space and time and resonance. So it kind of matters that you're here in Malmo at this moment, changing the energy in the room, which ripples outwards. So maybe I want to begin there. How do you think about or conceptualize or philosophize about energy and transmission in your own practice and in the practice of hip-hop dance, as it's been labeled?
Emotion. E equals energy. M-O means ephemeral. T-I-O-N means action. So what are the energies behind these short-lived actions? You're not always sad or angry or. So what is the frequency in that energy? What levels are we talking about? What levels in terms of the vibrations that are emitted? The vibrations of what is within coming out and creating sound that travels and enters through the acoustic meatus. How does that change a person, a being? It's a very tangible thing, emotions. You're dealing with feelings, mental. The emotions are the embodiment of what that feeling is. And so we're thinking about energy. You know, energy is everything. Energy is the thought process that we have. And it's just considering that, how that energy shifts the frequency, shifts the vibration, which again connects to the next person, next being, you know, and what that can do positively, negatively. You think about frequency and pitch can shatter that glass if you hit the right one. So it's like the music hits us in a certain way. The cultural sounds that we live amongst hit us in a certain way that if I find myself in a different community, a different culture, and I hear that reflects my upbringing, that familiarity, that energy does something to me. It creates a different mood in me. So that's a key thing in our human existence, is to recognize the vibrational wavelengths of this earth and how we're connected to them rhythmically. What that means encompasses rhythm is everything in life. People talk about, I can't dance, I don't have rhythm. You can talk, you talk in rhythm. You walk in rhythm. The blood flows in rhythm. The heartbeat beats in rhythm. The fetus grows in rhythm. The two hemispheres of your brain work in synchronous, rhythmic harmonization, if you will. The planets are aligned rhythmically. Everything in our existence is wrapped up in rhythm and vibration and frequency is the energy. We've lost that because of a number of things, but just to introduce that in my daily practices, bringing those conversations to a head. When I teach movement, it is through that process that we understand chakra energy, that we understand being rooted in first chakra is not just about warrior stance, but but it is about being connected to my ancestry. It is about being connected to my identity. When I think about identity, you think about I, me, dent. What is a dent? A dent leaves a mark. So what leaves a mark on me? I can skip the next I and talk about the T and the Y, tie. How does that tie to me? So this thing that left a mark on me is I'm tethered to it in a particular experience and becomes part of my identity. And so my dance practice involves not so much people getting the movement, which I'm going to do, but making sure that in learning this movement, your practice reflects your social cultural experience. And what are those things? Because I can't offer that to you. I can offer you my cultural experience and how I move my body. It's going to mean a completely different thing to you. It's going to feel different to you. The music is going to resonate with you in a different way. But it's to always reconnect us to earth, to energy, to that which is almost takes us back to our child need of being in the womb and being secure, of living in that type of practice through this expression, which again brings us back to rhythm, pitch, energy, tone, vibration.
Yeah, and the thing is, everything you're saying resonates with me, both on a bodily level and also intellectually and philosophically. But I think it's also, it might sound esoteric, but it's very practical.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot about bias and racism and discrimination and migration and all these issues that are kind of the priorities, particularly of Malmö municipality here in this region. And when I try and filter it down, I think a lot about it in terms of energy. I mean, if you're walking past somebody in the street and they just kind of slight you in a certain kind of way, that also leaves a mark. That also leaves a trace that then you have to shake off. So I'm also thinking about this practice as, you know, the early iterations of the practice is kind of shaking off, you know, imperialism, shaking off colonialism. But that's happening on a daily level also now, like in the street now.
Yeah, I mean, you look at jazz, you look at Dusty. That's shaking it off. But why is that shaking it off? Because then you look at the ring shout and look at the dance practice based on agrarian lifestyles. You look at Haiti and what is shaking the shaking your skirts, it's shaking the spirits, and what those evil spirits, you're shaking that off. So we get into that, and it's where being a human being is freaking hard. It is really hard, and unfortunately, we are 2019 in plus, and we're still dealing with the ramifications of ideologies that have put this energy out there because of whatever. You know, was there a sense of I don't want to say fear, but was there a sense of like payback, for lack of a better term, for when the Moors controlled Europe for like 800 years? Was there a sense of like dominating, like, we're going to shift this?
Yeah.
And what effects, if any, did that cause, if that was the process or the process? So we're still dealing with racial issues. You know what I mean? That sets up the poor from the rich. We're going to have y'all fight amongst yourselves. We're still dealing with that. And we've borrowed in these, we've attached ourselves to these constructs so deeply that it's hard for us to get back to humanity and get past them. It's difficult. Even in the most positive aspects, it becomes really difficult. I struggle with teaching my cultural practice in other countries. I struggle with it. I actually stopped going I stopped traveling in 2013 for that very reason. I lived in Poland for about a year, and I was like, there's no practice. There's this moment of me teaching y'all, but outside of this, in Poland, y'all don't get it. Y'all don't do this. Y'all don't see it. And so, you know, people say, well, why are you teaching university? Because there's access. These kids are exposed to these people in a really particular, interesting way. They're not just seeing it on TV. They go outside and people are here, and they see it and they hear about it in the news. And it's like, all right, I want y'all to have a different sense of empathy based on the information that I teach you. So now in this interaction, there's a change in how you navigate these spaces. So I stopped. I was like, I can't because my culture is not for sale. But I struggle with it because I do realize that it is something that brings people together. It has done more for interracial relationships than anything else ever has. Even though people don't like hip hop, I'm like, but hip hop, as the new name for a cultural lineage, hip hop cares about one thing: can you rock? That's it. Whatever. Can you rock the walls? Can you rock the turntables? Can you rock the mics? Can you rock? I don't care. We don't speak the same language. Can you do this? And we'll speak corporeally, right? So it brings people together, and I get the liberation, but I struggle and I question. I have questions. I'm curious. Like, I was lucky enough, even with all the struggle, I was lucky to be born black. I'm so rich in it. I'm like, yeah, this is the coolest shit ever. But to still make sure that there are safe, brave spaces for inclusivity as human beings, but still live in this cultural dynamic. And I question, I'm like, well, what is it about African retentions? Because I'm not African. I don't have a lived experience of being African. I retain in my body a lot of the cultural practice that still comes out for African American people, but it's missing some information of not being on the continent. But it's tethered,
or it's like what Robert Farris Thompson describes as the flash of the spirit.
Yeah,
it's like there as a trace.
Yeah.
And, yeah,
it's that aesthetic of cool. It's in all that, and you know, I wonder. I was like, well, what's going on with other cultures? Oh, I'm like, okay, well, what? Well, we don't like our folklore culture. Why? We do. Like this, Kazakhs from Russia is in this. I love it, and we just keep reinventing it, and because it's how we grow up, it's how we talk. Well, we talk the way we talk because of our parents, because, and so it's constantly reinventing itself. Like, what's going on in these other countries?
But do you think it's maybe because hip-hop is not nationalistic in the same way as other folkloric expressions?
Definitely.
So it's like these days, if you wear a traditional costume in many parts of Europe, if you wear lederhosen in Germany, or you wear, the Norwegian national costume, it's saying something about your relationship to place. Whereas hip-hop it migrates, it's diasporic by its very nature, so it migrates differently. Do you think that maybe that's it?
Yeah, and that's one of the things, I would agree, that's one of the things that we've lost in terms of that area of deep-rooted connection, not being from Africa. So, like, the retention is there as a lived practice, but the cultural product is not there in the same way. You know what I mean? So it's like hip-hop does allow to kind of move and navigate in those spaces in a different way, where there's information that's retained in the body, but there's no particular garb. The garb is not of the people. It is something that's like, oh, we like those Adidas sneakers, they're going to be the representation of hip-hop. But it's not produced from the community, and so then it's not traditional in that sense that, why are you wearing that on? And then when you do wear something that's traditional for an African context, I know it's a broad term, but there's that reflection or connection to the past, which is experienced through the blood memory, but not experienced tangibly, right?
But could we also flip it? Because I'm thinking about hip-based sensibilities, hip-based forms of movement. And I the other day I was like in Saluhallen, and there was some R&B that came on in the speakers, and then this small white Swedish boy started moving his hips in a certain kind of way. He was dancing like he was doing hip hop, and I thought, oh, okay, that's definitely a hack of the body politic, right? That, I mean, to be attempting to move the hips at that age, or like 5, 6 years, that's something is happening there. I kind of saw it as a reverse hack in a way.
Yeah, I don't even know.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to.
Because, like, we talk about hip hop dance. We talk about bouncing and rocking a lot, right? We're always rocking. There's always this bounce.
Yeah.
That's a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
You have a baby, and you're holding the baby, what do you do?
Yeah.
I don't care where you from. You doing this. And you always rocking, or you rocking this way. Everybody does it.
Yeah.
And it's a part of who we are as human beings. How it's illuminated in the cultural practice might be a different shift.
Yeah.
And so I would have to know more information. I need more context behind this young child you saw.
Like literally just standing there, we're in
But
the
I
queue.
mean,
Oh, yeah.
what's going on at home?
Oh, right.
What are you exposed to? You know,
That's the point.
I need to see that, and even if it's only to like negate it, like I need to say, okay, so it's not that information. Okay, I got some other questions, but that's the curiosity. Like, what is the experience? Because, like I said, from they say at age 2 is when we start to see this practice in the babies that we can recognize as something in the cultural dynamic. But before then, again, even in the womb, you're taking in information, and it's processing as the brain continues to develop. Once you're here, nobody's really truly teaching a child how to walk. You're not truly teaching a child how to roll over. Like it's innate. It's like, this is what I'm supposed to do, but I'm seeing and I'm figuring out and things are going. So I would need to know, like, I would question, like, what has this child been exposed to, if anything? Is that part of where that's coming from? If the movement looks particular, right? Or is it just the natural thing that babies do? They bounce, they rock, they move. And it's like, oh, I got hips.
I got it.
Right? This does something. Is there, like, oh, I can sit up.
Yeah.
Like, what are these things? What are these appendages? And what are those? Because they don't do nothing. Everything is up here. And the legs are just being dragged, and the baby's like, I don't know what that is, but I was just figuring stuff out. And there's an importance, I think, that people take in how you celebrate what that is.
Yeah.
The question is, does somebody see a child do that and get excited? And then how does the child internalize that?
Yeah.
Because there's an acknowledgement of, like, right, and how much attention are we giving to the hips, and like, what is that, and what is the child taking in? So then they want to play a little bit more and find it, and what else is in the discovery. So it's just that just brings questions.
Yeah.
All that said,
the new Black Performance Theory reader by Thomas DeFrance and what's her name? I can't remember now. It'll come back to me. And they are sort of theorizing hip hop as using Bourdieu of all things. I was like, okay, as a habitus, right? So I'm just gonna clean it down and say as a kind of holding space. And I thought about that a lot because I was recently in Greenland and saw some hip hop artists there that I was just like, what? And in another post/colonial context, where this mode of expression and articulation does matter on a political level in terms of voice and speaking back to the Danish colonial context, which is still very strong. So, I mean, do you have thoughts and reflections about hip-hop as a kind of holding space for other political subjectivities that are not necessarily of African descent, but still have those colonial roots?
Totally. I think that's the concept that is so captivating about hip-hop, if you understand it in that way. That it is beyond this American context. It is beyond this Afro-diasporic thing. Conceptually, is an idea to speak out against what is, oppressing you. That is a travesty. That is, tumultuous in your environment. In Brazil, there was a moment, I don't know if they're still doing it, but there was a moment where a lot of the MCs were speaking against the political rule and what was going on economically and so forth. And they had that because there's ownership of the body. And while financially I may not have access to this, I have my voice. So one of the easiest things to do was to dance and to rap. I don't need equipment for that. And they're not rapping about bling bling and, pardon my English, hoes and bitches, which is stupid. But they're actually having something potent to say about their experience. And so I think that's across the board for everyone to not have a sense of mimicry It doesn't need to be this, flattery, imitating. No, use this concept to speak your truth, is what I was saying earlier. How do you use these ideals to talk about how you express joy in your community? How do you deal with joy and sadness through this lens of it's released in the body? Like, I'm feeling not holding this in, but I'm going to release this. And I'm going to release it in this way. I'm going to speak out against this. I'm going to bring people together in this way. That's all it is. It's cultivating a sense of community, which, when you think about the ring shout during enslavement, that's how they cultivated community. You're talking a number of Africans who may have been at war with one another, have different foci in terms of their cultural identity, but are now put in a position where they work together and figure out how to cultivate a safe and brave space for them to practice, to hold on to their traditions. And that should be able to work for everyone if they are able, willing to acknowledge those things in that way. And if that is a part of their daily practice anyway, that might be something easily, readily available for them to explore as a way to push back. Because, the habitus is all about that. Yeah. It's all about what's cooking in the environment. Yeah. And just navigating those waters in that way.
I feel like I should now
throw it. Please raise your hands. Don't, no, that's not.
Share the space.
That's not a ball.
But it is very light, so if I throw it to you, don't panic. Would anybody like to poke, ask Monsell any questions? Or share reflections?
We can bring it to you if you don't want to.
And I'm not, a lot of the stuff I'm sharing is some of it's mine. A lot of it is, mentors and other scholars and whatnot. And I'm not an expert in anything. So, challenge what I say. I tell my students all the time, don't believe it because I said it, challenge it.
So I'll challenge you.
Challenge!
So when we're talking about Africa, it's a very diverse place.
Yes, it is.
Okay, just that we're clear on that. And there are also different movements from place to place, because Ethiopia, they're much more up in there. Up in
their
shoulders. Yeah.
Which is really hard.
And it's very hard. And, if I've seen...
a Kista dance, right?
What?
Is it a Kista? Is that how you say it? A Kista.
And then, if I look at Benin, Ouida, when we're talking about culture, this is my kind of question, because I'm kind of coming from an experience where I've seen a lot of cultures that are not clear in its form, because they've been influenced through colonialism, you therefore have that syncretism that's happening in many places. And so the question, what is appropriated in those senses? If you're living parts of a dynamic culture and you're a part of these other cultural forms, and other cultures, you're taking something from something else and also intertwining it into your own practice.
I don't think we really know.
Okay, it's just
no, because
to sort of put that out there, that these dynamics are also happening. It's not only.
Oh yeah, totally. Like I said with tap, you cannot. Even though one of the things to look at, and to your question, I would say that what people are looking at is the specificity in the practice that they're living in that moment. So for people to say, well, tap or hoofing, whichever words you prefer, in America, they'll say that the tap is what the Broadway dancers do, but the hoofing is the real thing. But there is no tap or hoofing in America without Scottish Highlander dance, without English claw, without Irish jigs, hornpipes, and reels. It doesn't happen. You have Captain Cook, who was the sea captain of the Navy, who used to make the men dance reel dances when they did long voyages. Captain Cook was the reason that he came up with the idea of dance de negros, dance the slaves. And he was like, if it works to keep men in shape, we do that. So some scholars believe like one of the first dances exposed, and this is only during the Atlantic slave trade, because we do know that people were in trade well before that. So we don't know what was happening before then. We only go by this. So even that begs to your question, like, they're already trading, but our focus becomes this area because we have some idea what the journals, we know what was happening. But again, we look at that, there's such an influence. We don't know where one begins and another one ends. And so then we start to look at this idea of the aesthetics and what is common, right, amongst a group of people. But as you pointed out, if this area is in Africa is focused on, the shoulders, and in this area is focused on the hips, and in this area is focused on the feet, and it's all that. And so when you look at a lot of Black American dances, it is the amalgamation of those ideas, so that when we talk about, and not that this doesn't exist in other countries, but when Americans talk about this polyrhythmic, polycentricism, in exploring every part, it's not focused on just this. It's everything. It's almost an amalgamation of what these African people who come together through forced migration, the influence they have on each other.
But they're also influences.
Right, and they're,
it's like many continents.
yeah, but that's what I said earlier. So you look at those that are involved in the slave trade, you look at Portugal, you look at England, you look at France, the African communities that are in that are exposed to this. They are exposed to them. We know something else was going on before then, but in this space, that is happening. Then we look at the Taino Indians throughout the Southern Islands. So it's a huge amalgamation, but I think what people are looking at is, or might be looking at, again, is the specificity of what they grow up understanding and knowing as ritual or practice in that community, to say this is what we commonly do. Out of this mixture, this thing happened. This thing is focused on what is very particular in our community, in American society, of what culture can be to African American people. Because let's also understand that me being Black, my lived experience is not the same as somebody Black in the South. So there's differences there. There is a commonality in the experience of what Blackness is, but our lived experience is different.
It changes.
Yeah.
How big your community is.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's looking at the things that I think may be a bit more consistent as a norm, if you will. And then we're like, well, so-and-so is doing that. Y'all don't really do. It's kind of like in America, that there was a time in the 70s that two things. No one did power shakes but Black people. So a power shake is like these really elaborate handshakes. But that was tethered to civil rights movement and going back to celebrating Black identity and whatnot. But now everybody does it. There was newscasters who you would not hear rapping or saying for shizzle or all these things. It's like these sort of colloquialisms that exist in this community. Now everybody's doing it. I think they're looking at those kind of things. And then the deeper discussion, what you're pointing out, is other influences, how they exist. Because even if I talk about the dozens, and this being called the dozens, in Ireland when it was called fleeting, it was the same thing. But there are journals saying that even though we would find this concept in other countries, the way that Africans had an approach to it and what you could say and could not say and what was most offensive was particular to whatever group that these journalists were writing about, I don't know. So it's hard. It's hard to kind of pull it back. Yeah, it's really difficult.
I've seen Japanese go to Jamaica and done pata pata.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, okay.
But and you totally can do it, because like I said, we all have the mental capacity to learn whatever cultural practice. But then people start looking at, all right, well, let's go back. Was your grandparents doing this? Was your grandparents like people start going back like.
Start marrying. And
Say again?
Then they start marrying, and then they start becoming a part of the culture, and then where does that? The lines are like kind of.
I mean, we have that out here with like Nigerians who are marrying Swedish people to have African dance classes, and the Nigerians are drumming while the Swedish women are teaching the class. I've seen that here a number of times. I'm like, the negotiation of cultural identity is interesting. And how do we navigate that? What is that for us as an individual, for us as a community, which you really can't take on? There's just a perception that there's a level of space where we can speak to our community based on that experience. So it's tangled, and untangling it is damn near impossible, but it's interesting conversations.
Any other questions or challenges?
He scared me with that one because I was like, oh.
I want to ask what your perception on teaching these dances are. I probably asked something like that before, but I think, like, for example, when you have this lecture, there's so much knowledge that I feel like it's impossible to know enough to feel ready to teach it. And is it even, like, for example, my place or someone else who's a guest in the culture to teach these dances, because I will never be able to have the same lived experience as
you have? That's one I struggle with as well. Like, because this goes to Sister Friend's question as well. Like, I struggle with, how can I put this? Personally, and this is something that I need to have more investigation on. But personally, I am at a space now where I feel like if a person from Brazil should teach capoeira. A person from, Ghana, Senegal, wherever, a person from here should teach whatever that is. That's part of the cultural dynamic that they've understood growing up. Everything that informs that should come from them first, in my opinion, my personal opinion. The person that should have access to go on stage and make money off of that should be them. I struggle with this space that because we can, we should. Just because you can doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't mean you should. There's a lot of information that gets confusing, and if you get a pass from an elder who's like, this person has been studying with me for X amount of years, and I'm like, yeah, go ahead and do the thing. But there's still information that they're not going to have. It doesn't mean that they can't do the dance and they're not proficient at the dance. There's just always a continuous learning. Even for me, I'm still going to continue to learn stuff about that was happening in the past. And so I think that is important, that I don't believe in master classes. Like that's just a marketing tool. No one's a master because you're always learning, you're always growing. You're sharing some information that you have, and then 2 months later you find out some stuff you didn't know, right? So it's like, you're not a master, sit down with that. But there are spaces where people have studied extensively with an elder, where they get a pass to teach, and I struggle with that. I struggle with, y'all have the Harang dance schools out here. I struggle with that place. Haven't been to it yet. Have people are trying to convince me, like, you need to go. But I'm struggling because for the swing community, Lindy Hop people in here, Frankie Manning's Centennial was rough on me to, one, for Harlem not to be invited. No one in Harlem knew that was going on. It was pretty much closed to those that were celebrating Frankie. It's from Harlem. How much money did y'all give to Harlem? The Harlem Swing Society was a footnote. They had a little flyer that was in this elaborate printed out book. and somebody just put flyers in the books. I don't think I don't know if the organizers did it, but I know there were flyers in some of the books.
It was the organizer.
It was the organizers? Okay. But I'm like, how you on Harlem stage and you got 3 Swedish people doing the Berry Brothers? Are you out of your mind? You got and this is what I was told, and I was appalled. The Harlem Hot Shots, an African American dance ensemble. I was like, y'all ain't African American. I don't care who choreographed y'all, who taught y'all. You are not African American, and that I know of, you're not from Harlem. So why are you called the Harlem Hot Shots? You don't represent Harlem. You're doing a dance that was at a particular concept was born in Harlem, but let's not negate the fact that without the Texas Tommy, there is no swing out. And then we can get into a bunch of European court dances. Right? So like, again, to Sister Friend, like there's influence coming in every direction. But specifically to what, for that dance, the Lindy Hop, I'm like, the representation, like this is a long way, and it scares me in a way because the conversation that you're talking about, the information that was withheld, is like, I find Lindy Hop, I find hip hop really interesting now because people want to go back in time. It ain't the 70s. It is not the 40s. Why are you dressing like it's the 40s? That's a costume, right? There was a guy, I have a new article coming out in a book. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm being really long-winded right now. But I have a new article coming out in this jazz book. This guy who I found out actually changed his name to Black Hawk Hancock, and I want to find him, which is a really weird name, but there's no space for me to judge on that. But he wrote articles, and in the articles he's talking about, that people he interviewed was like, well, if black people drop the ball, you can't drop culture. It's in here. That's why I can produce it anywhere I go. I might not have the same material as I had wherever I'm from, but I know how to, because I know it in the body, I can, all right, I'm gonna use that, and I'm gonna recreate it, the thing. And it's just information like that. I'm like, why y'all wanna go back to a time to like, do y'all understand the level of Jim Crowism that was going on in America? Y'all just live in the fun side of it, because y'all didn't have to deal with that. And so for you to play dress up is cute. But how you mean you don't want to hear the stories that Norma got this, well, she's being, but no, she's telling y'all the truth. This dance was born out of that. You want to understand this dance? Like Baba Chuck said, you want to understand the dance, understand the people. You want to understand the people, study the culture. It matters. It informs. And so I see a lack of that on the positive and negative side. My son teaches dance, and I blast him all the time. You have no experience in the clubs, but I'm gonna give you a pass because you're teaching 5th graders. Don't go to high school. No, he gets mad at me. I'm like, dude, you have no club experience. So what you teaching? Where you guiding them? You have no experience in this. You have no information. You have what somebody else told you, and it's not physicalized. It hasn't been physicalized on you. So there's only so much you can do. So you're going to teach 5th graders? Have at it. If you're going to teach high school kids, do it for free. You should not get paid to teach something you have no experience in. You don't have a true background in it. And so all of that stuff.
At the same time, if I hadn't taken class from some of the Scandinavian dancers, I would not have been to this lecture, because I wouldn't have heard the information they're passing on.
And that's part of my dissonance, because some of this stuff is like, it's almost like sometimes I feel, and like I said, I struggle with it. Y'all better pray for me, y'all. I struggle with it because there are elements of me that are like, people should not have it all. There's some stuff it's just in the secret sauce. You shouldn't have access to it. You can have this, But you don't get all it. Nah, you ain't been through this pain, this struggle. You know, in the article, Black Hawk Hancock, he was talking about, I forget was two that he wrote that I forget which one of this two, but he was saying how, now I don't know if he said this in real life, but in the article, he says that he and his wife wanted to get into Chicago stepping. Chicago stepping comes out of Lindy Hop. And they went to South Side Chicago to a steppers club, predominantly black. In the article, he does not divulge that he and his wife can Lindy Hop. So in the article, he acknowledges that these black people were like, okay, they get down a little bit. Yeah, because they Lindy Hop. But they don't tell you that. So he's celebrating the fact that, like, yeah, we were welcomed and whatever. And then, you know, we went to shop where they shop. That's a costume. They wear them gaiters to work. They go there to buy their suits for work. They go to church. You buying it as a costume and thinking you fitting in. No, that's not how this works. Like, you ain't a part of it. Are you there in the South Side of Chicago when somebody gets shot? Are you there to stand up and protest about what's going on? How are you truly participating in this environment that you say you like?
But also, what does it enable as well, right?
Yeah.
And this is how you can then stretch the conversation to, I think about this a lot in Sweden in terms of yoga and other art. It's like, yes, we do yoga on every street corner, but then all the classes are like totally mono, and then they are not inclusive spaces, which totally counteracts the whole point of the practice. So it's like
Their lifestyle
there's so
counteracts
much,
it.
Yeah.
Like, because you walk outside the studio, is the rest of your life conducive to the ideology behind what the practice of yoga is? No? Then what are you doing? Other than learning how to stretch. Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, I'm going to take that one.
But you know what I mean? Like,
You're just stretching.
it's you know, you can't practice this for an hour one day of the week or 3 days or whatever it is, and then the rest of your life has nothing to do with this. Or it's minute, like, oh yeah, I got my chakra drum, and I got my singing bowls, and I'm like ding, 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 like.
And then that does not translate into a shift in how your relational dynamics work, your community works, the way you think about privilege and power. Because that's what the whole point is to kind of deconstruct all of those ideologies that you were talking about.
And you find existence in something, which begs the question I was thinking about earlier, what is missing from your own cultural dynamic?
Yeah.
That you can't find it in your lived experience, that you have to go over here. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm wondering what's missing. What has been, and it's not no fault of yours, but what has been set in motion that suggests the national identity is this, and you're supposed to think, and we grow up thinking, I'm supposed to, and this is what we do. And that says who? And why do you believe that? Fashion says who? Who gave you the control to be like, this is us in fashion? Says who? And why do you believe in that? If you like it, then wear it, but they ain't right. You know, just because, oh yeah, you're supposed to, again, says who? So it's, you know, I say it's hard being a human being. It's a lot of stuff to question. There's a lot of stuff to figure out. And that's just you know, you might get a million different answers from a million different people.
We have another question. So,
I'm with you. I'm with you. Don't throw that at me. Here you go.
I have kids. So I think about
Okay,
I can talk loudly, so it's okay. I think also about the fact of so I lived in Norway for a while as well, and I used to work in an artist collective where we got funding to support teachers who were from Ghana, who were from Gabon, to teach elements of dancehall, to teach Afrobeat. Because the issue of asking already if it's okay, or how do I, as a Swedish white person, teach this dance practice, why are you not looking in your communities to find out who is from that place, who can get paid first? So that's like, was a big issue for us is that we used to fundraise to pay people who were from those spaces to teach the dance, because at the time as well, it becomes about who is actually getting the money at the end of the day. So it has a lot to do, I think, as well with capital.
Yeah, totally.
Supporting people financially, which is a way of showing appreciation and respect, but also like, why would you be taking somebody else's money who should be paid for that?
I struggle with that. Like that is, and it's great. Like it's great that people all over the world love Lindy. My grandparents and their generation of friends, when I was young, taught me the dances of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. My grandma was born in 1915. So I learned those dances as a kid. My parents taught me the dances that were popular in the 50s and 60s as a kid. I grew up doing all of these dances. At age 2, I was hooked on Louis Jordan. My father plays 5 different instruments. He took the toys off my bassinet and hooked up speakers before I could crawl, and played jazz music and classical music. I grew up with this. I grew up learning the dances that were in the 70s, so I'm getting decades of information about dances. And it resonates with me in a really particular way. And to what the statement you just said, I was just like, when I found out that there was a dance competition held in Harlem, and if you won, they sent you to Sweden to study a dance born in Harlem. I was like, huh? Okay, you love to dance. Why is this held? Why is that finance coming here? You love to dance? How about you throw that event in Harlem and tell everybody to come to Harlem, or somewhere that's going to benefit this community and educate the youth who may not know, because the youth always have a disconnect with the elders, who may not know the significance. I struggle with that. I'm like, no. And I'll go to Haran. Y'all gonna bring me for free. I'm not paying y'all one dime. Love y'all to death. As a human being, love you. But no. Finances, where they go, if I can help it, is going to my community. If I can't help it, here you go. But in that, I'm like, yeah, I'm struggling. And like, you need to go. That's a rough one for me. How much money do they give to Harlem? And maybe that's esoteric right there to even think like that. But I'm like, yeah, I need to see that. I need to see what you're doing for Harlem. Because when, what's the name from London? No, the brother. Yeah, when Ryan Francois, he had his class downtown during Frankie's thing, it was packed. And Harlem was like 8 people, if that, and he was frustrated. Like, what, like this is Harlem. This is where they should be at. So that becomes another thing that I struggle with. Like, who is benefiting financially from these practices, and how are we engaging that conversation?
Okay. I mean, any more questions? We're running over time, but that's fine. We're fine. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, you have a question back?
Yeah, why not?
What's your
I
question?
got this. That's too
sorry.
much. That's too much. I'm really just throwing this back at y'all. I'm interested to know what was 2 things. Even though I didn't go fully in depth on each thing, I kind of really just introduced some things. 1, what was the most impactful to you? And 2, now let's just go with that one.
I'll walk over.
What would you say was the most impactful?
Anyone would like to?
Anybody, everybody. Oh, why not? What was the most impactful in a 1-word, 1 phrase takeaway?
Hello. I am not a dancer, but I am
That's okay.
really interested in the part of like the part of the culture behind the art expressions, and about decolonizing basically are the ways that we see the world. For me, the most impactful, or like the thing that resonated most with myself was also this part of like learning to know the people and the culture. I can relate to that because I'm also training capoeira, and I feel the same thing. Like, I'm here to learn something, but I cannot really relate to this experience myself. On the other hand, I am from Mexico, so I come from a very, very, very mixed people that have roots in many different ethnical backgrounds. So somehow I am also wondering, okay, how do I start relating to my own heritage that is very, very diverse in itself, and that I might not own completely anything at all, but own little bits of things. So that for me is almost like a personal challenge
Hey.
to continue my.
I think we all there with you. I think we're all there with you.
And thank you for the talk.
My pleasure. Don't have me treat this like my lecture class and just start pointing people out. I do it. I do it. Sister girl right here. She was here. Yeah.
Well, I think I got stuck on the thing you said about Swedish identity being perhaps could be the word lagom. And hip hop is like, it's a big movement in the world. It's big in Sweden and it's getting bigger, but hip hop hasn't really got the recognition it should in Sweden. It has struggled and it still does. So I thought it just got really clear to me why, because it's like hip hop for me is kind of opposite of lagom. So I just suddenly saw the clash just really more clearly, and I understand why hip hop had to struggle that much in Sweden and still is. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Let's go in the back, because I was about to point somebody else out. No one escapes. No.
Here in the back.
Hey.
Thank you, first of all. For me, it's been really interesting, or the most kind of thing that's resonated has been about the discourse around, or the conversation around who gets their own culture, and sort of where does art fit in that? Because right now in the world we're living, to make art, you need to learn how to do it. Otherwise, you're not a professional. Or this is what we're, so how, and then culture and art always gets grouped together, but it's not the same thing, but the lines are blurred all the time. And so for me, just put through this conversation, revisiting that argument, and sort of it's just what's exploding my brain a bit right now.
Yeah, I would have a pushback on that, because I didn't learn how to, I guess I did. I learned through my parents what these dances are and all that kind of stuff. I learned through them.
I'm not saying you're not a professional.
No. I'm not questioning that. I'm not questioning that. No, I don't even acknowledge this professional thing. I ain't tripping about that.
What I'm saying at the moment is, for example, if you want to apply for funding
Yeah.
to make art, you have to have been to university.
Right.
And you have to have a degree. You don't in England, but you do in Sweden.
Right. So here.
So there is a,
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that your thing was an attack. No, I wasn't. I'm in alignment with you, because like I never went to university.
Yeah.
I'm straight out of high school and barely got out of high school. Barely got out of high school. At like ninth grade, I had all Fs. My parents didn't know what to do with me. I hated to read. They got tutors. Sixth grade, they got tutors, because I would not read. I went to summer school every year in high school, graduated from summer school, didn't earn enough points to actually get my degree in high school, so I had to go back to school to do another test, pass that. They said, take this paper to the school and they'll give you the diploma. And I basically said, keep your diploma, because I don't even believe in this BS piece of paper. So I never went back to school. They still have my diploma probably. And I left. And dance, then I really started dancing professionally, and it just opened up a whole other door. And then I got hired at the university. And then I really started to study. And I started studying neuropsychology on my own. for 9 years because there was no 4 year and I get to stop. I'm going to study it. I still study it. So it's just ongoing. And the fact that I had so much information in my body about the dance and histories, and now I'm studying all this information, just kept elevating the game, or my ability to do certain things with it in this academic space. But that, for the professional thing, I throw all that stuff out the door. You know, you just do the thing. Unfortunately, what you're talking about is these spaces where you need to have, y'all don't know nothing. Y'all are just monetizing what is self-expression, what it should be free to express. And y'all have created a system that monetizes for you to go through this maze to do this thing, which unfortunately denies people who are brilliant and then who feel like they can't be a part of something because they have to navigate this. That's a problem. And that's part of this hierarchy. I need to know, shut up. People take dance classes now. Why are you in dance class? Just go to a club. We don't have clubs. Then start a club. That's how you think we learn. Nobody taught Frankie Manning how to do, other than Frankie Manning. We wasn't in studios. There were no studios. I didn't even know people went to studios when I was a kid. I was like, you go, huh? It made no sense to me. I learned how to roller skate because my mom took me roller skating every week. And she would laugh at me because I couldn't skate backwards. And she could. So I learned, I'm going to get this. Y'all, I'm going to get this. But, you know, it's just that practice. We got to go back to putting value on the abilities that people have and their interest in supporting that some kind of way. Who knows, maybe we'll change the system. Because in America right now, you could not have the job that I have without an MFA. They don't even care if you got a master's, you need an MFA. And I'm like, my elders are like, you work at a PhD level. I don't know about that, but I'm like, I probably couldn't go, I don't even know if I could go to another university right now. I'm not, but I don't even know if I could. Because they might be like, well, you don't have any letters behind your name. But if I had gone to school, I still wouldn't know what I know. Because they don't teach what I know in school. So we reevaluate the value of that education.
But this is why it connects to what that
Yeah.
is saying to that question.
Yeah.
So, Monsell,
Yes.
Durham, you have been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your energy and your presence and your time with us.
Sure.
Since I would like to describe you as a culture bearer also, as someone who is kind of sharing and passing on a legacy from one space and time to another. So my last question, and if you can answer it briefly, if it's even possible.
I can do it.
What would you like to pass on from your practice, from your...
3 things.
Ooh.
First, my definition of dance, discovering the autobiographical self, negotiating creativity and expression. Human beings are constantly discovering who we are, what our narrative is. What are we negotiating? We're negotiating gender, our voice, our ideas, our culture, our space, our bodies, so on and so on. Creativity, to me, is a production of those things. The expression is a space that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to share our core feelings with others, more importantly, ourselves, because we deny self fast. Second thing, we are human beings. You go to check the little box, what are your, right, human being, and skip all the other craziness. We are hue, H-U-E, shades. We are all the same color. We're just different shades. Some of you are lighter than this to the lightest cream, beige, tan, because I was a visual painter for years. I specialized in portraits. I don't care who you are, where you from, I start with the same 3 colors, beige, cream, and tan. We go to the whole hue of the spectrum. So human is not H-U, it's H-U-E, hue, shade. M period, A period, M period. Molecular anatomical neural computers. Being, B-E means to exist, I-N-G in action. That's what human beings are. We're not wrapped up in this construct of race. Get out of that. It's the problem. Lastly, everybody stand up. Don't worry, this is not, it's painless.
Performance anxiety.
You're not You're not about to dance. Just repeat verbally and gesture after me. Can we do that?
Yes.
All right. Peace.
Peace.
Love.
Love.
And respect
Respect.
for everyone.
For everyone.
One more time. Peace.
Peace.
Love.
Love.
Respect
Respect.
for everyone.
For everyone.
The only time
The only time
I will look down upon a person,
I will look down upon a person.
gesture like this.
Gesture like this.
No, don't say that. And somebody gonna break the spell. So, let me say again, the only time
The only time
I will look down upon a person
I will look down upon a person
is when I'm helping them up.
Is
when I'm helping them.
Last time, peace,
Peace.
love,
Love.
respect
Respect.
for everyone.
For everyone.
Thank you guys very much.